recording.
Uh-oh.
Okay, Linda, you see the little blue got it button?
Yeah.
Click that.
Thank you.
You're so welcome.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. That is good.
Okay, we are all set. Hey, before we dive in to the text, as always, is there anything that anyone wants to lead off with? Anything you've been thinking about? Anything you've been...
Where is, there it is.
Gail, you talking to yourself or you talking to us, honey?
I am. I'm trying to find my pointer. And I'm on the old computer and I don't know how to work it.
She's
all right.
Girl.
Yeah, but I'll just make a note, Dave, that we're more than halfway through the book. So that's a good sign.
Yeah,
little more than halfway.
Yeah, we've been moving right along. We'll go through the spiritual maxims as well. There's some good things in there, but that's not going to be as intensive as going through the letters. So actually, once we're through the letters, we're through the bulk of the book. The maxims will just be they'll be the gravy added on to the end of it. Okay, so nothing anybody's thinking about? Anything you want to bring up? All right. Well, then let's go to page 8. I'm sorry. I keep wanting to say 80 because that's what it looks like through my now 2-week prescription lenses. But 63. Yeah, I know. I need upgrades. But it's expensive. Gosh, it's crazy. We are going to talk about the 8th letter today. We finished the 7th letter last week. So we're going to move on to the 8th letter on page 63. Okay, everybody there? All right, so we're back to writing to the Reverend Mother. So we've had several letters to her. So this is an ongoing relationship that he's had with her, and several letters have survived. So he's back talking to her again. We don't have a date for this letter. The last letter was dated October 11th, 1688. So he's getting up there. He's what, 68 years old or something now? He's going to talk to this woman. He says they've been in religious life 40 years each. So yeah, getting up there. Oh, you know what? Before we start, I just got a text back from Becky, and I'll just read it to you. Dave, pain in rehab has been difficult, such that my sister stayed an extra week. Nights are worse. And so she sent a picture with her and she's in a cast. Oh my gosh. Oh, that was her foot surgery. Remember her foot surgery that she was having? Mm-hmm. It was more complicated.
This is not her throat then.
No, she had foot surgery in July, and she's still going through the rehab for that, and it's been difficult for her. So, okay. She says, right now, evenings are the worst. I'm mostly stuck in bed with my foot in the air. But here's a pic when I was up, and she sent that picture. At least she's smiling. She just needs to take a page out of Patricia's book and just leave the camera off, right? And then she can be laying in bed with her. So, all right, 8th letter. Let's get down to business here. To the Reverend Mother N. Reverend and most honored mother. You tell me nothing new. You tell me nothing new. You're not the only one troubled by wandering thoughts. Our mind constantly wanders, but the will is mistress of our faculties and must recall it and bring it to God as its last end. There are going to be a lot of really practical tips and insights and observances that he's going to be giving in the next 2 letters. And it starts right here. You're telling me nothing new. First of all, this is a window into this nun's condition, right? That she is having trouble. So they've had this ongoing relationship. They've been talking. They've been writing to each other. Brother Lawrence has been trying to instruct her on his way of contemplative practice, his practice of presence. And she's hitting the wall. Any of you who have tried to structure a contemplative program for yourselves and then tried to be disciplined to it and going through it, have you hit the wall? Mm-hmm. Do you know what I'm talking about when we say we hit the wall?
Can't do it anymore?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You feel like a lot of times at the beginning, you can feel like you're making some progress. And then all of a sudden it just seems to, even worse than just plateau, it seems to really drop down the other side. And you just feel like you're just going no place. In fact, you're regressing. And it's really disturbing and it's really distressing, that you're just not making any forward motion anymore, or you feel like you're going backwards. And I feel like this is what has happened to her. She's hit that wall where it just doesn't feel like she's going any further. It may be, what John of the Cross called the dark night of the soul, where you hit that place where you no longer feel God's presence emotionally. And it just feels like, you're just losing it. So his response to her is, you're not telling me anything new. I mean, this is just part of the process. Every single one of us is going to have this oscillation, this sense of up and down, the sense of forward motion, and then maybe a regression. You are not the only one who's troubled by wandering thoughts. I would say anybody who has tried contemplative practice has been troubled by wandering thoughts. Am I right? Any of you who've tried it? Yeah, I mean, this is just part of it. It's the hardest thing that we do. Our mind constantly wanders. The other translation was good. I liked it. They said, our mind is extremely fickle, is the way the other translation put that line. But he says, the will is mistress. The other translation was master of our faculties or our powers, and must recall our thoughts and bring them back to God as its last end or its final goal. These wandering thoughts that we have in our minds, it really is the byproduct of self-awareness. If we weren't self-aware, if we weren't able to conceive of ourselves as a separate self, we wouldn't have a mind that could wander this way, that could conceive of past or future and think abstractly. Animals don't have the same ability. Small children don't have the same ability. So this is a byproduct of our self-awareness and our egoic consciousness. So therefore, it's necessary. We have to be able to have wandering thoughts if we're going to actually be human beings. What we don't want them to do is to rule us, for our mind to be so untethered that it's just going all the time. I've had people tell me that 99.9% of the time, they're not thinking about what they're actually doing. Their minds are always wandering someplace else. Obviously, that's not healthy. But she is worried about this, and he's trying to let her know this is just part of the process. Don't worry about it. This is what it's going to be like as you go forward. But I want to ask what you think about this idea of that the will is the master or the mistress of our faculties or powers and can recall our mind, bring it back into the present moment. Does that seem right to you? I mean, I'm not contesting what he means, but the way he says it sounds like by sheer force of will, we can do these things. Have any of you been successful in by sheer force of will corralling your thoughts?
Dave, the only time I've been able to do it is when I focus on that feather setting on the cotton that you've kind of explained sometimes when you're trying to meditate and just be light and not anything. But I've really been having a hard time just being quiet without that focus and lightly holding something. It's I'm still working at it. It was easier when I used to go out on my hikes and was sitting in nature and just quiet around me. But when I'm sitting out on my deck here, I'm having a hard time without intentionally saying, just stop, or not let my mind constantly run away with what I'm supposed to be doing or what I'm thinking of.
Now, for any of you who are not familiar with centering prayer, what Bill is talking about is the practice of centering prayer in which you select a sacred word. It can be anything. Mine is usually Abba, which just means father, an intimate form of father in Aramaic. And so when you find that, when you become aware that your thoughts are wandering away in your contemplative sit, in your prayer time, what you do is you just gently, mentally, silently say your sacred word. So it would be Abba. But the way Thomas Keating puts it is you just lay it gently down the way you would lay a feather down on absorbent cotton, is the way he puts it. You're not trying to jam it in. You're not trying to force your thoughts out. You just gently lay the sacred word down, and like a pebble on the surface of a very still pond that's covered with a film of dirt, it'll clear out that space as the rings go outward. And then they'll close back in again. And then you gently say the sacred word again, and it clears out the space. What Bill is talking about, though, is different than what this seems to be saying. This seems to be saying that by sheer force of will, that our will is the master of our unruly thoughts. And by force of will, we can bring our mind back into discipline. And I would suggest to you that if you try to do that, it's only going to make it worse. You know, it's literally like those two wolves, the good wolf and the bad wolf that are inside you. Which one is going to win? Because they're constantly fighting. The one that you feed. So by feeding the wolf that you don't want, you actually make it stronger. You're feeding it your attention, you're feeding it your energy, and it gets stronger. The way that you want to bring your thoughts back into alignment is by what Bill is saying. You refocus on the moment that you're in, and then you displace the things that you don't want. You know, it's kind of like when you put a ship in water or put a boat in water, it displaces water that's equal in weight to the boat itself. And so what you're going to do is you're going to immerse yourself into the moment, and you're going to displace all the things that your mind is spinning on. If you focus on what you do want, if you're focusing on the negative and you're trying to push it away, you're going to give it more energy. And so it's kind of the Chinese have a saying for this, wei wu, which means, you know, wei wu wei, do not do. It's doing by not doing, basically, you know, very Zen thing. But the idea is that you are going to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish by going in the opposite direction. These are the thoughts that are distracting you. You don't want those, but you're just going to focus on the moment and let those other moments be displaced. So you're recalling your mind to the present by trying to ground yourself back and let those thoughts go. So it feels a little bit, you know, indirect as you're trying to do it. Ken?
Yeah, isn't that still an act of the will, though? You're still choosing. You're just choosing not to feed the bad dog. You're not going to focus on the distracting thought, because I have that trouble in centering prayer. I end up with, I don't realize it until I've already been like 10 sentences down the road. You know what I mean? And it's like I'm concocting a whole storyline in my mind. And I feel like it's an act of will to I picture that feather coming down on a dandelion, and Abba is my centering word. And so I say that and breathe slowly as that feather settles. And then I just breathe again. And then I'm there present with God again, and not on those distracting thoughts. But isn't all of that still an act of the will?
Yes, it is. But I wanted to make the distinction of the way that we're choosing. Cynthia Bourgeault calls this state that we're trying to get in, the state of the practice of presence, or the state that we're trying to get in centering prayer, as choiceless awareness. So it's not that your mind is completely silent. It's not that you're completely checked out from reality. It's not that you're in a trance. In fact, you're hyper aware of everything that's around you, both external sensory input and also your internal thought processes and emotions and bodily functions and everything. What you're doing is you're not choosing to focus on any one of those. It's choiceless awareness. And that is, yes, Ken, it is an act of will. We're choosing not to focus on something. We're choosing not to make a choice to focus on things. But I wanted to make that distinction, because when you just read this, the way that I read this, or the way that I would understand it typically, would be that I'm going to wish this stuff into the cornfield. I'm going to stamp it out. I'm going to make it gone. And that's going to be, you know, again, I'm grabbing something by the throat and I'm bringing it into alignment. You know, I'm bending it to my will. And that is the opposite of what it's going to really feel like as you're doing it. It's, again, it's that relinquishment. It's pushing off and falling back. It always feels so different than the way that we approach anything else in the first half of life, as opposed to the second half.
So Dave, am I going in the wrong direction? Sometimes when I'm sitting there and these thoughts just keep on me, I've been finding myself going to just giving myself over to pray about each of those concerns or things that are stirring within me, and kind of get them out of my system. I used to journal to do that, and then come back to that place of quietness. Am I just returning back to the area where I don't want to be going?
Well, yeah, if you are now praying about those things and you're
At
thinking
the moment, but for the purpose of just getting them off my mind, I'm going to give myself over to think about them, pray about it, release it as best I know how, so that I can come back and be presently aware of what's around me, but not preoccupied with all these other things that have been stirring with me.
Well, I'll tell you what, if it's not broke, don't fix it. I mean, if that's working for you, then by all means you go for it. But you are leaving the realm of centering prayer. You're voluntarily leaving the realm of centering prayer by starting to think again and think about these things. Now, if you're doing it as kind of a cleansing of the palate so that you can come back to that place of peace, well, and like I said, if that's what works, then absolutely, because we're all going to be a little bit different. But I think you may not need to do that if you just keep coming back. Let yourself really be grounded in the present moment. Maybe you don't need to go on an excursion like that. But if you do, you do. You know what the goal is. You know what you're trying to get back to, and just keep trying to come back. I would say, there's not a lot of hard and fast rules here. Our goal in a meditational sit, in a contemplative sit where we're actually carving out time to do this, is to spend as much time as possible in that state of choiceless awareness, where we are aware, but we're not thinking about anything. We just want to be in that place, just kind of watching things go by. The other thing too is when your thoughts are distracting you, don't let them have a real high emotional valence. Don't let them frustrate you. Don't let them anger you. It can be kind of a little bit of amusement. Oh, there goes my head again. Gosh, there I go again. And just kind of let it pass by. One of the images is you're sitting at the bank of a river and you're just watching all these objects float down the river, but you just let them go. You don't hang on to them. You don't try to discern them. You don't think about them. You just let them go. Whatever image works for you, and Bill, if that works for you, then great. If that cleanses it and gets it out of your system, then perfect.
So let me ask you, with my Western mind, then, what is the result of that?
Of doing this?
Yes.
Well, there's a lot of things that are happening, but the two major ones, for my money, is this. First of all, you are perfecting your own personal technique for being able to come back to a solid presence and awareness in the moment from whatever distractions occur, whether they're interior emotionally, cognitively, or they're exterior in terms of sensory input. When you are triggered and you're pulled off center, you're able more and more and repeatedly and quickly able to come back to center. Not just so you can do it in your 20 or 30-minute sit, but so that all throughout the day, as you're being pulled this way and that by a stressful day, you'll be more aware of when you're pulled off, and you can come right back to center again. So much more of your day can be spent in actual mindfulness, where the only thing you're thinking about is what you're actually doing. And the second thing is that the more time you spend away from the egoic consciousness, the less and less the egoic consciousness is going to have a hold on you in terms of your identification with it. Our whole goal here is to realize that the egoic consciousness is a temporary construct that came with the earth suit, right? It's the byproduct of our self-awareness, but it's not who we are. And if we are completely inside that bubble, we identify with that and we think that's who we are. But that all stops at the headstone. And that's the egoic consciousness is what carries all of the trauma and all of the harmful memories and limitations and core beliefs that hamstring us and limit us through life. And so to step away from that and spend more time just in that pure state, we're starting to realize there's a deeper self that is evergreen, a deeper self that isn't affected by all of that. And that is that universal connection. And so more and more we're able to identify with that. And that creates the balance between the two. So your centering prayer or meditation time is doing those two things for you. It's making you more able to go throughout your day in a mindful state, and it's starting to show you that there's a deeper self that is not just limited to the ego and consciousness. Now, that's not something that you can put on a spreadsheet, right? It's not something that's going to give you a clear one-to-one sort of goal, and it's not something that's going to happen overnight either. And that's one of the issues with starting contemplative practice. In fact, what he's going to talk about in the next letter is a young woman that they both know who is impatient because it's not happening fast enough. And she's trying to go faster. She wants to go faster. And he's saying, his line is, she's going faster than grace will allow, which I think is a beautiful way to put it. But she's goal-oriented. She's trying to get someplace. And contemplative practice is still about relinquishment. So it's for the Western mind, it's a bit of a conundrum.
Dave, I like what you were just describing there in response to Bill's comment. In acceptance and commitment therapy, they have this concept they talk about as cognitive fusion. It's like when we treat our thoughts like they're real. We treat our thoughts and our memories, or even our thoughts about what will happen in the future, like they're happening right now. And we have the emotional response to them. And the cognitive diffusion idea is we learn how to look at our thoughts rather than from our thoughts.
That's a great distinction. Say that again, William.
We learn how to look at our thoughts rather than from our thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
So by just looking at them, you know, and I think what Bill was describing has value in the sense of, you know, meditation can be like therapy for yourself, basically, because it's interesting to see what pops up, right? But when you get too curious about what pops up, you might maybe add some karmic energy to that thought, or I don't know if that's the right choice of words, but the idea of instead of being fused with my thoughts and treating my thoughts like they're real, I can just observe the thoughts as they come and go. And sometimes they're coming fast and I can just notice them, like I'm standing next to the 5 during rush hour. And then there are other times they're coming slow, like if I'm standing next to the I-5 at 2 in the morning. But all I'm doing is, instead of being caught up in the thoughts, I'm just letting them go by. And this contemplative practice takes it in another way, where we're actually returning, not just looking at our thoughts, but I suppose you're inserting the presence of God as a way of diffusing that thought flow, maybe.
I mean, I would say that any type of mindfulness meditative practice is being fully present and aware of the moment and being present with God. That's just me, because that's kind of what you're doing, is you're connecting to the here and now and saying, like, letting everything else go and saying, like, just connecting and being having that heartfelt center. I think all of it really accomplishes just about the same thing. It's just what works for us, whatever calms us and release that stress a little bit and allows you to, like, feel connected and present, is really just being right there with God, you know, and experiencing it.
And to another question that Dave asked earlier, and I'm glad Allison just said that, like, it reduces stress and tension and things of that nature. And we know that mind wandering produces unhappiness, is highly correlated with unhappiness. We don't know how to make people happy, but we know that mind wandering will make you unhappy. So mind wandering about the past makes you more depressed, and mind wandering about the future makes you more anxious. And that's been well researched and documented. So the side benefit is you'll be happier.
And
So
if you think about it, you're going to be happiest when the moment is enough for you, when there is nothing that you perceive that has to be added or taken away from the moment that you're in, and it's enough so that you're not even thinking about anything else except that is by definition contentment, that or happiness. And mind wandering is the exact opposite of that. And so yes, so that's going to be another benefit. Go ahead, Bill.
So any human being can get to that point, conceivably. Where is God in the midst of that? Because it seems that people can be in tune with themselves, but can they be without God?
Well, certainly not according to Brother Lawrence. According to Brother Lawrence, God is everywhere and every when. There is no place, you can't even go to hell and get shut of God, because he'll still be there. And if you're aware of that presence even in hell, then your hell will be turned into a paradise. So he takes it that far, right? So there is no place that you can go that God isn't. And really what we're talking about here, when we're spending time aside from our egoic consciousness, which really is the distraction, it is the wall between us and this deeper sense of everything spiritual, then we're spending time face to face, spirit to spirit with God. It's a wordless connection. It's not going to be specific. God isn't going to be telling you the what's, because as soon as you're considering a what, you're thinking again, right? And so this connection with God is going to be at that deeper level, that universal level. But that is the connection that we have with God. And if every time that we go there to that present moment and step aside from all these distracting thoughts, we have that sense of connection, peace, unity, whatever you want to call it, well, that's who our God is. Our God is that unity, that oneness, that love, that forgiveness, all of those things. And more, this is what Brother Lawrence is saying. He knows who his God is because of the time that he spent in God's presence. And no one can shake him of that. And no matter how much he thinks he needs to suffer for the things that he's done wrong, all God does is shower him with gifts and with ecstasies that he doesn't feel he deserves. And he feels guilty about that. He feels embarrassed about that. He's going to say that in this letter or the next one. So I think that's kind of where God's presence comes in, Bill, if that answers the question.
Can I piggyback on that real quick?
Sure.
Bill's question made me think of the Sufis quote, to know myself is to know God. And the idea here is to know myself as pure awareness, where I can sit in the seat of my consciousness and observe my thoughts and observe my egoic functioning, even if I'm not coming at it from a spiritual place and I'm just doing it mindfully. Like having access to that awareness gives me access to God. Like bringing an awareness to that awareness, I think, is something inherently spiritual, even if I'm not thinking of God like Brother Lawrence does. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah.
And there's also effects, right? There's like the effects that happen because of the centering prayer and becoming aware. So then you have like a Christ-like behavior, right? So you tend to come slower into situations and be present and aware with other people. And when they're speaking with you, like you're truly sitting there with them with your full presence and actively listening. Or maybe it's when you're driving down the road and you used to, cuss when people cut you off, and all of a sudden you just kind of pump the brake and you're like, oh, hey, come on over, buddy. And the behavior changes and the way reacting to life and life circumstances changes, which is really a beautiful process. And I mean, and just working from the place of love. And I think it's beautiful. I had a way to turn it back around, and my mind's wandering because I'm also starving right now. But Bill, your question was so good because you're like, okay, when I'm doing this, but like asking, like, where's God? What is it like? It's almost like putting it, like, how can I physically put him in like a box or this experience in a box and understand it? But I think that was like the best question that's been asked in a while. So thank you for that.
I want to add to what Allison said, because for me, when I'm aware of the present moment, I don't feel like I'm with God. I just feel like I'm ensconced in reality. For me, the feeling of God is more in a sense of playful interaction. That's where I feel like I'm involved with God, where I feel like, I'm having some intuition, or I'm painting something, or I'm creating something. And I feel like God is like a co-partner in those moments. So to me, God, the feeling that I'm connecting with God is in a relational sense and not just being dialed into reality, if that helps. I think that's kind of what Allison was getting at. But I see it, it's like playing with God. Is where I feel God's presence the most.
That's an interesting distinction. Yeah, I like that. Randy?
Well, so here's the general logic. If God is everywhere, everyone, okay, that's my basic belief and such. It's could be compared with something like, I don't know, oxygen or gravity or whatever type of thing. It's always there, okay? All that really involves this is William was talking about consciousness. If my consciousness now is contemplating the presence of God, then all of a sudden, presto changeo, abracadabra, God's right there. But then the other thing is also everywhere, everyone, the infinite component of the concept of God for me. It's, guess what I'm coming at? If God is infinite, then logically there's infinite ways to experience God. And therefore, again, I love the collaborating, the creating component of myself, because for myself, that's when I get into a state of flow, which this choiceless choice type of thing. I'm just jamming on the guitar, going through chord progressions, and just music's coming out without me necessarily premeditating them. Words are coming out, conversation, where I'm kind of surprised what comes out type of thing. Just not necessarily trying to be in control, but observing the energy that is flowing through me and through what is around me. Again, this choiceless awareness of awareness kind of thing. That for me is God. But for anyone else in this meeting, they probably have their own moments of understanding. And again, contemplation and consciousness of God. It could be, again, basically infinite amount of things. Again, if the logic prevails, God is infinite. So this is, for me, it's been very, very helpful. One, in my experience, and two, in connecting with others when they choose to share their experience. They can say God is a puppy dog. Cool. Years ago, I found offense to that because I was very diehard with my concept of Jesus Christ being God. It didn't fit in my mold. But this thing has allowed me to be much more open, flexible in my own experience and with others. I walk the dog, speaking of puppy dog, I walk my dog and I feel the breeze on me, and this invisible thing of the wind is reminding me of what I've been trying to articulate. But I guess that's it. I don't think this is something I can articulate. Maybe some people are, Dave certainly does it better, but that's really, truly, I think when I'm experiencing it, it's beyond my comprehension and knowledge. If I can explain it and I get it all figured out, that's when I believe I'm coming from the egoic mind.
So there's one thing that's important to remember, that as soon as we're thinking about God, we're not present to God anymore. Okay,
Yeah.
we're present to our thoughts. So if we're thinking about God in a religious in religious terms, or theological terms, or as a puppy dog, or anything else, as soon as that thought comes into mind and we're thinking about that, then we have left the building in terms of contemplative practice. This consciousness of God, this awareness of God's presence without thinking about it, is going to be wordless. It's going to be imageless. You know, I think there's a reason why the Jews forbade their people to make any image of God, because as soon as you do that, you're stopped at the object itself, and you're no longer present to the presence behind the image. And so it's the same thing with our thoughts. Our thoughts are creating idols all the time. And what we're trying to do in contemplative practice is step away from all of those and just be completely immersed in presence. Now, one of the things that I was thinking about as I'm listening to me speak and all of you all speak is that, you know, this can get pretty deep and pretty existential pretty quickly. And you know, I imagine someone just coming and listening to this for the first time, or maybe some of you who are still silent, and saying, God, are we just like navel gazing now? You know, is this all just about how many angels we can fit on the head of a pin? You know, we're all trying to express something that's really inexpressible. But if we go back and just step back and remember, the only one thing that we need to do is just show up to presence. Just keep showing up to presence. That's Brother Lawrence's formula. And all the rest of this stuff will take care of itself. You know, when Bill asked the question, what's going to come of this if we do this? And I named my first two things, but William came up with another one. You know, that's that as you continue to practice this over time, I believe that the barrier between the subconscious and the conscious thins out, and stuff bubbles up. Not during the prayer time itself, but all the rest of the day. I mean, that's what it worked for me, because I never did therapy, even though I should have in my 30s. But my contemplative practice actually functioned as the therapist's couch, the analyst's couch. And it does work that way. There are all sorts of benefits that will come to you if you just do the one thing and keep it real simple. Just show up. You know, show up during your day mindfully, show up to your centering prayer or your meditational choicelessly, and then just see what happens. But we don't have to be thinking of all this. In a forum like this, we're trying to express things, and it can get pretty hairy pretty quickly. But try to read between the lines of what everybody is saying, because there are little gems in everybody's share tonight that can maybe help you to get a better handle on what it is you're trying to do as you come to your sits or to your mindful days. So hopefully we can just keep it simple. You know, don't let it get real complex in the practice of it. When you're trying to express it, well, it's going to get what it gets. But in the practice of it, it should be really, really simple. Just show up.
And I like the language they use in this translation. The will is mistress of our faculties and must recall it and bring it to God at its last end. So this, I think I like mistress better than master there.
The feminine, yeah.
I like the feminine, right? Because it's the will is our intention, I suppose, right? Our intention to bring our awareness back to the presence of God, and having that feminine, you know, surrender energy there seems to work better than master for me.
Yeah, just as wisdom is feminine, right? Spirit is feminine. Kingdom is feminine. All those words that we give masculine valence to is all feminine in the original language. So let's look at the second paragraph. When the mind is untrained from the beginning, it has acquired bad habits of wandering and dissipation, which are difficult to overcome and usually draw us, even against our will, to worldly things. The other translation I thought had a really interesting way of putting the untrained part. It said, when the mind has not been brought down from the beginning. I really like that, because that's what's really happening. We're bringing the mind down off of its pedestal. You know, we've got the egoic conscious up, you know, high up on the throne, and it is the end all and be all of our existence. So if that mind hasn't been brought down into its proper place, it doesn't get obliterated, but bring it down into the proper balance. If it's untrained, if it's not been brought down into the proper balance, then those bad habits that it has acquired of wandering and dissipation, which are difficult to overcome, are going to draw us back to what Richard Rohr called the surface. Remember, he had the surface and he had the depth in Everything Belongs. And most of us are living on the surface of things. We're really not getting down to the middle. What the egoic mind is always going to want to do is bring us back to the surface, back to the what's, back to the details, back to each little step that we need to take in order to survive and first half of life achievements, right? Mm-hmm. So we have to, there's some work we got to do here. The mind does have to be trained. We do have to discipline it by just showing up over and over to this task that we're assigning contemplatively. And over time, we get better and better at it, like anything else we do. And the more hours that you practice a day, the quicker you're going to get good at it, just like anything else that you would do, from riding a bike to a second language to a musical instrument. And so if we're practicing all day long through mindfulness, and we can make a lot of tracks here pretty quickly, even if we only have our 20-minute sit a day or so many days a week. Mindfulness is also training us in the same way. Now, in his third paragraph, he says, I think one remedy for this, for what? For this propensity of the mind to always be wandering and to draw us back to surface things, right? One remedy for this is to confess our faults and humble ourselves before God. So basically what he's talking about, what's he talking about? It's kind of like a fourth step, right? It's to just take it. It is to accept your imperfections. I mean, so much of our energy is given over to bolstering the identity of the ego. It's what we imagine ourselves to be. It's what we're trying to project in order to be accepted. And we spend so much energy, continuing to project that image and to really convince ourselves that that's who we are. But if we can humble ourselves, if we can accept our imperfections, if we can own the shadow, right? The way that Robert Johnson was talking about, and obviously admit our powerlessness over certain things, right? Then things are going to start to change. Confess our faults, accept our limitations. And that's going to be the beginning to all of this, just like it's the beginning to the 12 steps. To accept who we really are is going to be the beginning of everything we're going to do. We're not going to be able to will our mind to be silent, but we can accept what is right now and then choose not to jump on any one of those particular platforms. So I think one remedy for this is to humble ourselves before God. And then he says, I do not advise much talking in prayer, long discourses often being the cause of wandering. Well, that's exactly what Jesus said, right? I mean, he said, go into your prayer closet. Don't use long prayers and long words. You don't need that because your Father knows what you need before you even ask him. And those thoughts, all those words, are creating more and more thought process, more and more mind wandering, and you're reinforcing the egoic thought process, right? Gail?
Yeah, I had an experience yesterday with God and prayer. And I had lab work done, and I found myself prior to going that I was like, I'm really anxious about this. I don't know what this is all about, but I expressed that to him as I'm walking towards the building. And I just said, I don't know why I'm anxious, but I just held it up and said, I trust that whatever this is about, that you're going before me and that you'll work things out and that it'll be as it is. And there was a release there. So the first thing I do when I walk in the building, this woman, unknown to me, I've never seen her in my life, paid me a compliment. And I was like, well, I didn't need that, but thank you, and that was very unexpected. So then I went up the elevator to the lab and found out we didn't have to wear masks, which I was thrilled about. And checked in, and just each step, it took a little bit more because my orders were a little complicated, but that wasn't any big issue. The poor tech jammed the printer, and that took a little while, but it was like, whatever, I was just in peace mode. And then she's the one who did the draw, and we had the best heart-to-heart talk, and I could be present with her and at peace. And so it wasn't a long prayer, but it was there's a need here, and I'm anxious. I can't take care of it, but I know you can. And he did a really good job.
That's perfect, Gail.
Yeah.
And just notice that. I mean, it was a one-liner. That's all she needed to say.
It was.
And it's really not the words that are at issue. The words are just, there's something important concept in centering prayer. There is no intrinsic value in the sacred word. It's not a magic word. It doesn't have any power. It is just simply the signal of your intention to come back to a place of choiceless awareness. That's all it is. It's that signal of your intention. And it's a word that you have chosen. That's not emotionally loaded, but it still means something positive to you. And so you just use it as a signal. It's a tool. And so Gail's prayer was really along the same lines. It's a signal of her intention to come back to the moment and to be okay in a moment that is filled with anxiety. And that grounded her, centered her, and then everything else flowed from that. She did the one thing walking into the building, and everything else was added. Yeah. And that's exactly how it works. So we don't need a lot of words, but a simple set of words. The ancients just would say, Lord, help me. Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. And they'd say that hundreds of times a day, but it was just that little short line. But really, it wasn't the line so much. It was the signal of their intention to come back and be grounded in God's presence, to acknowledge God's presence, their dependency on God for every breath that they take. That's really the intention behind it. And so that simple one-liner can be the signal of that intention. It's not the words themselves. It's our intention behind it. And so that's great. Use that. Just like Bill said, he was using a prayer to try to purge out, and kind of like you would journal something. Well, he's doing it mentally. If that helps him, then great. That's his way of doing it. It may not be yours, but find your way. What is the way that works for you? The longest prayers I ever say are the ones I say with you all. When I'm praying to open and close these things, or praying on a Sunday morning corporately, that's when I use words. But I'm doing it to help all of us to be able to find a common focus, and to gather around certain principles. More than I think the words themselves are important. Hopefully they're important, at least in what they do for us as a group. But when I'm on my own, I hardly ever use words anymore. And if I do, it's going to be a prayer like Gail's. So he says, I do not advise much talking in prayer, long discourses often being the cause of wandering. Present yourself in prayer to God like a dumb and paralytic beggar at a rich man's door. All right, so that doesn't appeal to us Westerners much, right? We don't like that image. But what's he really talking about? Do you remember the little saying of Jesus? Actually, I think it's not so much a saying, he is observing. He's in the court at the temple, and he watches a Pharisee and a publican, a tax collector, both praying. And the Pharisee's up front, and he's got his chest out and he's got his arms raised, and he says, God, thank you that I am not like this poor slob over here, and pointing out the tax collector. And then the tax collector's in the back of the bus, and he's kneeling down and he's beating his breast, and he's saying, Lord, I am not worthy to receive you, but thank you. He's trying to show us the difference between those two kinds of prayers. One is puffed up and the other is recognizing his own humility. And so I think this is where Brother Lawrence is going. He says, don't do a lot of talking. Don't be trying to impress anybody, even yourself, your own image of yourself, by what you can formulate in words in terms of your prayer. But just show up, like this poor, mute paralytic. You can't walk, you can't talk, and you're completely dependent as you're knocking on this rich person's door for whatever they give you, whatever sustenance provision that they give you. Because really, every one of us in terms of our relationship with God we're completely dependent. We're dependent on the next breath, everything that we take for granted in life, all the things that we laughingly say we have control over is really complete dependence and vulnerability and fragility. And so if an awareness of that takes us into the Anavim spirit that we've talked about so much here, that complete reliance on God, and yet with gratitude, that complete sense of dependence and vulnerability, yet fearlessly and with gratitude. I mean, that's what he's saying. Don't worry about a lot of words. Just show up. Show up with a sense of gratitude and dependence and fearless vulnerability. He says, concentrate on keeping your mind in the presence of the Lord. If it sometimes wanders and withdraws itself from him, don't let it upset you. Don't let it worry you. Confusion or frustration serves rather to distract the mind than to recollect it. That's what we were talking about just a minute ago. If you find yourself continually being distracted in your centering prayer or even during the day, you can start to get really frustrated because you say, what's wrong with me? Why can't I do this? Everybody else can do this. Why can't I do this? As soon as you give yourself into that kind of frustration, all it is accelerating the train leaving the station, right? So that kind of frustration, that kind of confusion, I think it was last night that, was it Danielle or someone was talking about, hey, this is just another opportunity. It's another opportunity to come back to center. It's another opportunity for growth, rather than I'm doing it wrong. I'm a failure. What's wrong with me? So confusion serves rather to distract the mind rather than to recollect it. The will must bring it back calmly. Or the other translation was gently. Bring it back gently. Now we're back to the feather being laid on the absorbent cotton. It's not trying to jam a square peg in a round hole. It's not trying to acquire this silence of mind by sheer force of will, but it's just letting things be gently displaced as we come back. If you persevere in this way, God will have pity on you, or God will have mercy on you. In other words, yes, you will find yourself back in God's presence. He says, one way of easily recalling the mind during prayer and keeping it at rest is not to let it wander during the day. Okay? You're wondering why, when you sit down to pray, everything is just bouncing all over the place. But then you look at the rest of the day and you've been giving over to that constant reeling of the mind. It's kind of like saying, if you're a musician and you get on stage and you can't play the song, and you're just frustrated, I can't play the song. But you haven't been practicing all day long. You haven't been practicing at all. You just jump on stage and you think that you're going to be able to play the song, especially under pressure, with the audience there and the lights and the smoke machines. But if you're spending time in the practice room, then when you get on stage, you can actually play the song. This is exactly what he's saying. If you get to prayer and you can't do it, what are you doing all day long? So one way of easily recalling the mind during prayer and keeping it at rest is not to let it wander during the day. Practice presence all day long, not just in those short times of prayer. You should keep it strictly in the presence of God, and being accustomed to thinking of him often, it will be easy to keep your mind under control during your prayers, or at least to keep it from wandering. And so it's all about creating a seamless practice, not just relegating it to little slices. Oh, this is my sacred time, and this is my time when I can goof off and do whatever I do all day long. If we can start to bring this in, I've used the example several times of lucid dreaming, being able to wake up inside your dream, know that you're dreaming, but not wake up so that you can now control your dream. How do you get to the point where you can recognize you're dreaming? Well, all day long, you got to be questioning your state of consciousness. All day long, you're asking yourself, am I asleep or am I dreaming? Because in your dream state, it's just as real as the landscape of the waking state. So constantly, am I awake or am I dreaming? If you get into the practice of doing that all day long, you'll continue to do it when you're asleep in your dreams. This is basically what he's saying. If you spend your whole day bringing yourself back into God's presence, when you get into the prayer time, it's going to be a lot easier to just continue that process, even though it's more intense during your prayer time than it is during the day. So I've already told you at length in my other letters of the advantages found in this practice of the presence of God. So there's a key that there's a lot more letters that we're not seeing. We just got a couple that survived, but they've had an ongoing relationship and a lot of correspondence. Let us apply ourselves to it seriously and pray for each other. I commend myself also to the prayers of Sister N and Reverend Mother N, and am in all things in our Lord very humbly yours, Brother Lawrence. So he's really got some gems here as he's trying to help the Reverend Mother to get past the wall. She's hitting the wall, and we all do that. And he's trying, okay, here's how you do it. Here's some things to look out for. You know, take what you need, leave the rest, apply these. But they've been talking a long time about this, and they're going to continue to. Really cool to get little glimpses of the relationships and the care and concern that he has for these people. He really cares about them. He thinks about them, you can tell. And all of that care and concern comes out in his letters. All right. Any final thoughts, comments, concerns?
Question?
Okay.
What is the name of the book that you're, or maybe it's not one book. What book should I get to help me to go that way that you're talking to us? I love it. Does that make sense?
Okay, well, we're in the practice of the presence of God, Linda. Yeah. You have that book. Marion bought it for you and gave it to you. You just need to find it.
I have falling upward, and
yeah, I know you keep going back to that one, but that's the last study we did. So I would say at this point, Linda, just keep listening. You know, just listen to what we're doing. Don't worry about the book. Just listen, because we're reading through it and we're discussing it. So just listen, and I think you'll get what you need.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, dear.
Yeah, it's really good.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? All right. Well, then we've either explained it completely or we've completely confused you, one or the other. So hopefully it's the former and not the latter. All right. Again, we don't have Scotty here. He is luxuriating in 114-degree heat in the desert. So you go, Scott. And would anyone like to close us in prayer? Volunteers are being accepted. Linda did it last night. Anybody else? Not all at once.
I'll take a crack at it.
You go, William.
Father, thanks again for another opportunity to be here with each other and think out loud with each other and think of how you show up in our lives on a daily basis and how this practice of the presence of God can enhance our relationships, enhance the way we show up to each moment and how we show up to you. And thank you for all the wisdom shared in the group today, and we're eternally grateful and look forward to future gatherings as we continue to grow in spirit and grow in our relationship with you. So we thank you and pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, William. And
Amen.
thank you, everybody. Okay, so
Thank
we
you.
will see you on Sunday.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night, good night, good night. Good night, John. Good night, Kathy. Good night, Christopher.
Thank you.
And Jordana and Linda. You guys be good and see you over the weekend.
Yeah.
Okay, see you guys on
Okay.
Sunday.
Yeah.
See you guys.
All right.
Bye.
Hey, Kathy, you're staying to the bitter end. Oh, she just clicked off. All right. Good night.
Good night.